imagine for a second, just really picture this, that you are descending to the absolute bottom of the ocean.
Right.
You are leaving all the sunlight behind. You're slipping beneath the waves, and you're moving into this tiny, isolated habitat that's submerged under the crushing weight of thousands of gallons of water.
Sounds intense.
Oh, it gets wilder. Because you decide to live down there in total isolation for 100 days.
Wow. 100 days.
Yeah, 100 days. Your body is subjected to immense, just constant atmospheric pressure. You are trapped in a metal tube, completely removed from all the normal, everyday, natural rhythms of human life.
Right. No sunlight, no fresh air.
Exactly. And when you finally emerge, when you break the surface and take a breath of fresh air again, you aren't just alive. You are fundamentally changed.
Changed how?
Well, according to a massive battery of biological markers, you are literally 10 years younger.
I mean, it sounds like a pitch for a science fiction film, right? Like some secret fountain of youth hidden away at the bottom of the sea, guarded by pressure and darkness.
It really does. But this isn't fiction at all. This is the intensely documented, almost unbelievable reality of Dr. Joseph Dituri, who is affectionately known in the diving community as Dr. Deep Sea.
Dr. Deep Sea, I love that.
Yeah, he's a 56-year-old retired Navy commander, a biomedical engineer, and a clinical researcher. And today, we're going to unpack the extreme lengths this one man went to in order to heal an incurable brain injury.
Which is just a fascinating story.
It really is. We are getting into the radical science of hyperbaric pressure, the extreme limits of human endurance, and honestly, what his journey reveals about your own body's untapped ability to heal itself.
The stakes of his story are incredibly high. We are looking at a narrative of life, death, and really an absolute reshaping of modern medical paradigms.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've been poring over a collection of completely fascinating interviews he's given recently. We're pulling from his talks on A Healthy Point of View, Mr. Scientific, and Mulligan Brothers.
Yeah, synthesizing all these conversations gives us a front row seat to a man who literally had to hack his own biology just to survive.
Exactly. So to start, we really have to look at the environment. In June of 2022, Dr. Dituri embarks on what is essentially a world record-breaking experiment.
Right.
He moves into Jules Undersea Lodge, which is a 21-foot-deep underwater habitat located down in Key Largo, Florida.
21 feet down.
Yeah. And his initial plan was to stay down there for 93 days, but he pushes right past that. He stays for 100 days and absolutely shatters the previous 74-day record.
We really need to pause and conceptualize what living 21 feet underwater for 100 days actually entails. I mean, this is not a luxury submarine with panoramic windows and room service.
Excellent. Not.
No, the psychological and physical toll of this environment is central to the data we see later. You are dealing with a profound level of sensory deprivation and isolation. The physical quarters are incredibly small. I mean, we're talking roughly 100 square feet of usable space.
You're basically living inside a submerged utility pipe. You can't just open a door and go for a walk to clear your head if you feel claustrophobic.
Exactly. You can't even stand up straight in certain areas. And you are constantly surrounded by the mechanical drone of life support systems. Compressors, scrubbers, pumps, they never stop running.
That would drive me crazy.
Right. Because of the high-pressure environment and the constant noise, his sleep architecture was completely disrupted.
Yeah.
His overall well-being was under constant low-grade siege.
And he's working all the time, right?
Yeah, on top of that, he's not just sitting around reading books. He's a researcher and a highly trained diver, so he's actively running experiments, taking blood draws, and constantly troubleshooting the habitat's life support equipment.
Because if that fails, he dies.
Literally. He has to ensure a steady supply of food and oxygen. The stress of simply maintaining homeostasis in an environment that is actively trying to crush you is immense.
That's the part that is so wild to me. The environment is objectively hostile. I mean, the air is thick, the pressure is constantly pressing against your eardrums, your skin, your lungs.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The biological and medical data that came back when he finally returned to the surface. He went through all that stress, all that sleep deprivation, and the medical team evaluating him found that his biological age, like his epigenetic clock, had reversed by about 10 years.
The physiological shift is just profound. When you look at his blood panels, his cholesterol plummeted by 72 points.
Which is a massive drop for someone trapped in a small space who isn't exactly doing high-intensity cardio out in the sunshine.
Right, and his inflammatory markers dropped by 50%.
50%.
Yeah, and those markers are the crucial indicators of systemic stress and disease in the body. When inflammation goes down that drastically, it means the body is no longer fighting a constant internal battle.
That makes sense.
But perhaps the most remarkable finding was a massive surge in his stem cell count. And despite the isolation and the sleep issues, his cognitive abilities, his executive function, and his memory recall remained incredibly sharp.
But how does that actually work? I mean, if you put a human in a stressful, dark, loud tube for 3 months, you expect them to come out looking pale, sickly, and aged. You expect them to deteriorate.
Well, it comes down to how human biology responds to specific types of environmental pressure. The body is an adaptation machine. When he was 21 feet underwater, he was living at roughly 1.6 atmospheres of pressure.
Okay.
That is 60% more pressure than we feel standing at sea level. The medical professionals monitoring him observed profound shifts in his heart rate variability and his blood pressure. His cardiovascular system was actively recalibrating to the density of the air.
Because the air is physically heavier down there.
Exactly. Under that increased pressure, the gases he was breathing, specifically oxygen, were physically compressed. That compression forces oxygen deeper into the body's tissues, into the blood plasma, in ways that simply do not happen on the surface.
So it's almost like taking a piece of coal, putting it under the immense pressure of the earth, and pulling out a diamond.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, the sheer stress of the environment actually forced his body to optimize itself. It pushed his cellular machinery to function at a higher, more efficient level just to survive.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. The human body, when subjected to very specific, calculated physiological stressors, doesn't always break down. Sometimes it supercompensates.
Supercompensate.
Yeah. That massive increase in stem cells is the body's ultimate repair mechanism being kicked into overdrive. Stem cells are the raw, undifferentiated material the body uses to fix damaged tissues. They can become whatever the body needs them to be.
Like a biological wildcard.
Exactly. So to see a surge like that means his biology was triggered into an aggressive systemic state of regeneration.
But Dr. Dituri didn't just stumble into this underwater habitat on a whim. He didn't just wake up one Tuesday and say, I think I'll go live under the ocean to see if my wrinkles disappear.
Right, no.
His absolute obsession with the healing power of pressure and his willingness to subject himself to a 100-day isolation experiment was born out of a catastrophic, life-altering tragedy.
It's a heavy origin story.
It really is. He didn't do this for longevity. He did this to hack his own broken biology.
The 100-day dive was really the culmination of a much darker, much more desperate personal journey. A journey that started on a completely mundane afternoon on a normal road.
Let's go back to September of 2021. Dr. Dituri is driving his car. And it's really important to note what he's driving. He's in a 1947 Chevy.
Solid steel.
Exactly. A real, heavy, old-school piece of machinery. He stopped at a red light, just waiting for it to change, when a 6,000-pound modern SUV blows through the intersection and absolutely T-bones him.
The physics of a collision like that are just horrifying. When a modern 6,000-pound vehicle hits a rigid, solid steel 1947 car, there are no crumple zones to absorb the kinetic energy.
Right, because old cars don't crush the way new ones do.
Exactly. The SUV hit him directly on the driver's side. The entire side of the Chevy was crushed inward, transferring all of that violent kinetic energy directly into his body.
And because it was a customized, restored SUV that hit him, it had shaved door handles, meaning the exterior was completely smooth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so when the paramedics arrived, they couldn't even get the doors open to pull him out. He was physically trapped inside this crushed metal box. It was only because a bystander, some random car buff who understood the mechanics of old Chevy sliding windows, stepped in, that they were able to unlatch it and pry him out.
Thank goodness for that guy.
Seriously. But the damage to his body, and most importantly to his brain, was already done.
He suffered what neurologists call a coup contre coup injury.
Can you explain the anatomy of that? Because the mechanics of what happens inside the skull during a crash like that are brutal to think about.
Yeah, it's rough. So your brain isn't anchored rigidly inside your head. It's essentially a soft, gelatinous mass floating in cerebrospinal fluid within the hard, bony vault of your skull. When you are hit from the side with that much sudden force, your skull violently jerks in one direction and then abruptly stops. But your brain, due to inertia, keeps moving. The coup is the initial impact. The brain slams into the side of the skull closest to the point of collision.
It physically strikes the bone?
Violently. And the inside of the skull isn't perfectly smooth either. There are bony ridges, especially around the base. The brain scrapes against those.
Oh, man.
But then comes the contre coup, which is the rebound. After hitting the initial side, the brain bounces back through the fluid and violently sloshes backward, slamming into the exact opposite side of the skull.
So it's 2 impacts for the price of 1.
Exactly. You are getting a double impact, tearing delicate blood vessels and shearing nerve fibers, all from a single blow.
Just bouncing inside the skull like a pinball. Awful. And the result for him was an 8-millimeter hemorrhagic stroke in his left prefrontal cortex.
A literal brain bleed.
Yes. His brain was physically bleeding. He was completely knocked unconscious. He actually regains consciousness in the back of the ambulance, looks down at his body, and sees he's wearing medical scrubs.
Because he works at the university and the hospital, right?
Yeah.
He's a clinical researcher.
Right. And the paramedic leans over and says, "Hey, doc, how are you?" And he looks at her, and he has absolutely no idea who she is. He looks around, and he has no idea where he is.
That's terrifying.
But worst of all, he has no idea who he is. His memory, his identity, it was just gone in that moment.
He is rushed into the emergency room and spends 2 full days in the intensive care unit. The medical staff is terrified that the internal bleeding and the subsequent swelling are going to increase the intracranial pressure to a lethal level.
Because the skull can't stretch.
Exactly. When the brain swells, it has nowhere to go because the skull doesn't expand. They were watching him around the clock, fully prepared to drill a hole in his skull, a craniotomy, just to relieve the pressure before it crushed his brainstem. He spent a total of 7 days in the hospital just stabilizing.
And here's the part of the story that just makes my blood boil.
Yeah.
It's the moment of his discharge. He has a bleeding brain. He has suffered massive life-altering neurological trauma. And as he's being wheeled out, the doctor looks at him and tells him that all he needs is a tincture of time.
A tincture of time.
Just wait. Give it a little bit of time, and you'll be fine. Or you won't. Just go home and look at a clock.
It's a very poetic phrase that masks a profound medical helplessness.
But think about how insane that is. I mean, if you break your arm, they don't just say give it time, they set the bone. They encase it in plaster or fiberglass.
They intervene.
They might do an invasive surgery to insert titanium pins and plates. We've spent decades iterating on orthopedics to actively intervene and force the bone to heal correctly. But if you have a bleeding brain, the very organ that generates your consciousness, your personality, the thing that makes you you, standard medicine tells you to go sit on your couch and just wait. How does that make any logical sense?
It doesn't, and this raises an incredibly important question, one that Dr. Dituri himself became completely obsessed with once he regained some function. Why is the treatment for traumatic brain injury, or TBI, so remarkably stagnant?
Right.
If we look at the historical timeline of medicine, the first recorded instance of a traumatic brain injury in medical literature was found in the Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating back to around 1600 BC. And the clinical distinction between a simple mild concussion and a severe structural traumatic brain injury was clearly delineated way back in 1300 AD.
We have recognized and documented this exact injury for literally thousands of years.
Thousands of years of human medical history. And yet recently, when Dr. Dituri and his biomedical team at the University of South Florida submitted extensive paperwork to the FDA to begin a new clinical trial for brain healing, the FDA pushed back on their proposal.
Of course they did.
They told Dr. Dituri's team that they didn't like the endpoint they had established for a cured traumatic brain injury. So Dr. Dituri asked the FDA a very logical question. He said, okay, what is your endpoint for a cured TBI?
And what did they say?
The FDA's answer was chilling. They don't have one.
Wait, they don't have an endpoint, meaning the governing body of medical treatments in the United States doesn't even have a standardized definition for what a healed brain looks like.
That is the reality. There is no FDA-approved pill you can swallow to heal a TBI. There is no approved standardized medical procedure you can undergo specifically to regenerate brain tissue after a kinetic trauma. If you survive the initial swelling in the ICU, standard allopathic medicine offers you absolutely nothing other than observation, symptom management, and, as they told him, a tincture of time.
If we zoom out and connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes terrifying. Because this isn't just about Dr. Dituri sitting in a dark room waiting for his brain to magically knit itself back together. We have to expand the scope here, because TBI is not just a freak, 1 in a million occurrence that happens when someone runs a red light.
No, not at all.
It is a massive, completely silent epidemic. These are the invisible wounds that are quietly destroying millions of lives.
The statistics are horrifying once you start digging into the epidemiology of brain trauma. For instance, look at the military. Approximately 67% of military veterans in the United States have experienced at least one traumatic brain injury.
Think about that number, 67%. That is well over two-thirds of the people who serve. And it's not always from taking a bullet or hitting their head.
Often, it's from the blast over pressure of artillery or explosives. A shock wave passes right through a Kevlar helmet, right through the skull, and ripples through the brain tissue, causing microscopic shearing and inflammation that never resolves.
Just from being near the explosion.
Exactly. And it extends far beyond the military into athletics. NFL players, for example, are subjected to an estimated 3 to 5 impacts at roughly 35 miles per hour per game. The cumulative effect of that subconcussive trauma over a decade of playing is devastating to the neuroanatomy.
And that's just the athletes and soldiers.
Right. Then there is the everyday civilian risk. Every single time you get into a car, you are exposed to kinetic danger. Epidemiological models suggest a staggering probability, often cited as essentially a statistical certainty over the course of a long driving lifetime, that you will be involved in some form of collision.
The exposure to that level of kinetic force is just a baseline reality of modern life. We strap ourselves into metal boxes moving at 70 miles an hour every day. But out of all the numbers, the most tragic statistic is the one involving domestic violence.
Yeah, that one is rough.
An estimated 23 to 25% of all head injuries presenting in emergency rooms stem from domestic abuse.
A quarter of all head injuries are happening behind closed doors, people being repeatedly struck in the head by an intimate partner.
And the human cost of this epidemic, it's not just a lingering headache or a sensitivity to bright lights. It's a fundamental theft of identity. Dr. Dituri talks so openly and vulnerably about how this stroke completely transformed him as a human being.
Which takes a lot of courage to admit.
It does. Remember, this was a highly decorated Navy commander, a man who was used to managing incredibly complex salvage operations at 2,000 feet deep in the ocean. A guy whose entire career was built on keeping his cool, making rational decisions, and leading teams when lives were literally on the line.
Very stoic, very in control.
Exactly. But after the SUV crashed into him, he became a completely different entity.
The structural damage to his left prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain heavily involved in executive function, impulse control, and emotional regulation, completely rewired his personality.
It hijacked him.
He described himself as becoming perpetually angry, incredibly despondent, and prone to sudden, violent fits of crying for absolutely no discernible reason. He couldn't control his emotional state. He actually carried a folded piece of paper around the hospital and in public that read, "Hi, my name's Joe, and I have a traumatic brain injury. I am prone to fits of crying and anger."
Imagine the absolute humiliation and loss of self to have to hand that note to a stranger. He talked about driving his car months later, feeling so consumed by phantom rage that he wanted to physically rip the steering wheel off a column.
That's just heartbreaking.
And it's the people around the victim, the wives, the husbands, the children, who bear the absolute brunt of these personality changes. They're looking at a body they recognize, a face they love. But the person operating that body is fundamentally biochemically altered. They are strangers in their own homes.
That is the cruelest aspect of a traumatic brain injury. The neurology dictates the psychology. It is incredibly common for the primary consequence of a TBI to be major treatment-resistant depressive disorder.
Because the brain can't regulate the mood anymore.
Right, and even more alarming, when we look at research surrounding chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, which is the degenerative brain disease found in athletes and veterans, the most common cause of death among those with mild levels of CTE is suicide.
Wow.
The structural brain damage physically severs the individual's ability to regulate despair and maintain any semblance of hope. The hardware is broken, so the software crashes.
Which leads us directly to the darkest moment in Dr. Dituri's life. He reached his absolute breaking point. He was a broken man, facing a monolithic medical establishment that offered him zero hope, zero interventions, and just told him to watch the clock.
Yeah.
So he realized he had to rely on his military background and his engineering mindset to launch a life-or-death rescue mission on his own brain. No one else was coming to save him.
By mid-October 2021, which is just over a month after the horrific accident, the neurological despair was so deep and all-consuming that he actively, methodically planned his own suicide.
He didn't just have passive thoughts about dying. He picked a date on the calendar, December 8th, his own birthday.
That's heavy.
That was the day he was going to finalize his affairs and check out. But he is a man of incredibly deep Catholic faith, and he is a father to 3 daughters. He had this profound realization that if he was going to stand before his Maker on December 8th, He needed to be able to look God in the eye and say that he tried absolutely everything to save himself before pulling the plug.
Yeah.
He couldn't just give up without a fight.
That self-imposed deadline, December 8th, became the absolute catalyst for everything that follows. And from a strictly scientific perspective, this desperation forced him to completely subvert his normal academic approach to problem solving. He is a career clinical researcher. In the scientific method, the golden rule is that you isolate variables.
Right?
You test one thing at a time to definitively prove causality.
Exactly. If you are running a rigorous clinical trial, throwing 20 different therapies at a patient all at once is a total nightmare. From an academic standpoint, I would argue that's not even science, it's just throwing darts blindfolded.
Pretty much.
If you stack 10 therapies and the patient magically gets better, the medical community will look at the data and say, well, which one was the magic bullet? Was it the oxygen, the cold, the vitamins? We can't approve or publish this because we have no idea what the exact mechanism of action is.
That is exactly how the FDA and the medical establishment think, and it's why progress is so slow. But Dr. Dituri introduces a brilliant analogy to defend his methodology, and it perfectly explains his mindset when faced with his own mortality. The potted plant analogy.
I love this analogy.
He's so good. He says, imagine you have a dying potted plant sitting on your windowsill. Its leaves are brown, it's drooping, it's clearly dying. If you ask 3 different botanical experts what that plant needs, one might say it desperately needs water. Another might say it needs direct sunlight. The third might say it needs nitrogen-rich fertilizer.
Okay, so 3 different answers.
Right. If you act like a strict clinical researcher, you isolate the variables to see who is right. So, you take one dying plant and give it only water, locking it in a dark closet. What happens? It dies.
Because it needs sun.
Exactly. You take another dying plant and put it in the blazing sun, but give it no water, it dies. You give a third plant only fertilizer in the dark, it dies.
Because the plant is a complex biological system. It requires all 3 of those inputs, the water, light, and nutrients, simultaneously to survive.
Exactly. When you are fighting for your life, survival entirely trumps the scientific method. Survival is not a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. When you have exactly 1 month to live by your own ticking clock, you do not have the luxury of testing a single variable for 6 weeks.
No, you do everything at once.
He realized that the human body, much like that dying plant, requires physical, physiological, and psychological healing to occur all at the exact same time. If you only address the physical inflammation but ignore the psychological trauma of the crash, the nervous system remains stuck in fight or flight, and you don't heal.
So what does a man with a bleeding brain, a ticking clock, and an advanced engineering degree actually do? He implements what I can only describe as the absolute kitchen sink protocol.
His kitchen sink.
He abandoned the single variable rule and stacked every single healing modality he could research, find, or invent. Let's really break down this protocol, because the biology behind what he was doing every single day to save his life is fascinating.
It started with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, or HBOT. That was his baseline foundation, primarily because of his extensive Navy diving background. He knew what pressure could do,
Right.
but he knew oxygen alone wasn't enough. He immediately incorporated brutal, intense ice baths into his daily routine.
And we aren't talking about a quick, cool shower. He was submerging himself in freezing water for 3 to 5 minutes, specifically to induce a biological state called hormesis.
Hormesis is a fascinating evolutionary mechanism. It's the biological phenomenon where a highly beneficial physiological effect results from exposing the body to a low, acute dose of an environmental stressor that would otherwise be toxic or lethal at a high dose.
So what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, literally.
Literally. In this case, plunging into 39-degree water triggers a massive survival response. The extreme cold stress forces the body to release cold shock proteins, specifically one called RBM3, which has been shown to protect brain synapses.
Plus, the sheer shock to the system forces a massive release of endorphins and dopamine.
Exactly. He noted in his research a 13% increase in brown adipose tissue, which is a highly metabolically active fat that acts like an internal furnace, and up to 250 times the normal resting release of endorphins. It was a chemical reboot for his depressed brain.
And he brought rubber ducks into the ice bath. I love this detail.
Oh, yeah, the ducks.
He said you have to float little rubber ducks in your ice bath for mental levity, because if you take the suffering too seriously, you just add to your psychological burden. Keep it fun. And then, the literal second he stepped out of the freezing water, shivering and gasping, he wouldn't even grab a towel. He would stand there soaking wet and hold the Wonder Woman or Superman power poses, hands on hips, chest out, chin up.
Which, to an outside observer, looks completely ridiculous. But he wasn't doing it for motivation. He was doing it for endocrinology. He cited well-known studies originating from Harvard that demonstrated how holding expansive, powerful physical postures physically alters your hormone profile.
So the pose changes the chemistry.
Exactly. By standing like Superman after freezing his body, he was actively working to boost his testosterone levels and lower his cortisol, which is the primary stress hormone. He was stacking the physiological cold shock with a mechanical posture hack to manipulate his brain chemistry.
He didn't stop there. He layered on intense neurofeedback and cognitive behavioral therapy. He was working with practitioners to actively monitor his brainwaves in real time and consciously rewire the neural pathways that were keeping him trapped in loops of anger and depression. He used red light therapy panels and beamer mats.
And let's explain how those work, because it's not just magic light.
Right.
Red and near-infrared light penetrate the skin and skull and are absorbed by the mitochondria in your cells, specifically by an enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase. This absorption stimulates the mitochondria to produce more ATP, the energy currency of the cell, giving damaged brain cells the energy they need to repair themselves.
That's incredible.
And the beamer mats utilize pulsed electromagnetic fields, or PEMF. These specific magnetic frequencies are designed to stimulate vasomotion, which is the rhythmic pumping of the tiny capillaries in your microcirculation.
This improves oxygen delivery and waste removal at the cellular level. He was attacking the injury at the mitochondrial level. He also practiced daily grounding, physically walking outside and connecting his bare skin to the earth to absorb free electrons and reduce systemic inflammation.
He would also purposefully go outside and face east every single morning to watch the sunrise. And again, this wasn't just some poetic spiritual practice.
Everything has a biological purpose with him.
Everything. Viewing early morning sunlight, specifically the ratio of blue to yellow light at dawn, hits the melanopsin receptors in the eyes, which sends a signal directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain. This rigidly sets the circadian rhythm, optimizing sleep later that night, and provides a powerful psychological anchor of hope to start the day.
He also utilized a very specific custom compound called synapsin nasal spray.
This is a crucial piece of the puzzle. Synapsin is a highly specialized peptide formulation. It includes RG3, which is a powerful extract derived from Panax ginseng known to reduce neuroinflammation. It includes nicotinamide riboside, a precursor to NAD+, which is vital for cellular energy, and methylated B12.
But the delivery method is the genius part.
Right, because by administering it as a nasal spray, he completely bypasses the digestive system and the liver. The peptides travel up the nasal cavity and cross the blood-brain barrier directly via the olfactory nerve, delivering these neuroprotective compounds straight into the brain tissue.
It's an absolute backdoor into the brain. And here's the final part of his protocol, which brings us right back to that potted plant analogy. He went to rigorous physical rehab for his shoulder injury.
Because of the crash.
Right. Remember, he was crushed in that car. His left side was mangled. He realized that every single time he moved his left arm to reach for something, a sharp pain would shoot up his neck. That physical pain acted as a subconscious psychological trigger, reminding his brain of the trauma, pulling him right back to the moment of the crash.
The physical pain was keeping his amygdala, the fear center of the brain, in a state of hyperarousal. He understood that he had to completely eliminate the physical pain in his shoulder to allow the psychological and neurological healing to finally take root. He was treating the physical body, the physiological brain chemistry, and the psychological trauma all simultaneously.
The result of this frantic, exhausting, multimodality stacking, by the time his December 8th deadline rolled around, suicide was completely off the table.
He didn't just barely survive. By his own clinical assessment, he was functioning at a higher cognitive and emotional level than he was before the crash even happened.
Wow.
He successfully healed his own broken brain, defying the establishment that told him to just go home and wait.
And while this aggressive kitchen sink approach is what saved his life, his background in Navy diving meant that one particular therapy, the pressure, became the absolute cornerstone of his ongoing mission to heal others. Which brings us deeply into hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
Yeah.
But before we talk about the miracles of HBOT, we have to issue a massive blinking red warning to anyone listening right now. Because, as with all powerful scientific tools, playing around with atmospheric pressure and oxygen comes with immense, explosive danger.
To understand the danger, we first have to break down the science of how hyperbaric oxygen therapy actually works. What's fascinating here is the sheer unforgiving physics of it. The word hyperbaric literally translates to more than pressure. To understand why this heals the human body, we have to look back to a fundamental law of physics, Boyle's law.
Okay, take us back to high school physics class. Explain Boyle's law in a way that makes sense for what's happening inside the body.
All right, so Boyle's law states that at a constant temperature, the volume of a given mass of a dry gas is inversely proportional to its pressure. In simpler terms, as pressure increases, the volume of a gas decreases.
Okay, simpler terms.
Think of a simple latex balloon filled with air. If a diver takes that balloon deep underwater, the immense pressure of the surrounding water literally squishes the balloon from all sides, shrinking it down to a fraction of its original size.
Yeah.
The gas inside is compressed.
It gets packed incredibly tightly.
Exactly. Now, apply that to the human body. When a patient is placed inside a rigid, hard-shell, hyperbaric chamber, the atmospheric pressure is artificially cranked up, sometimes to 2 or 3 times the normal pressure you feel at sea level.
Right.
As you breathe in pure oxygen inside that pressurized environment, the volume of the oxygen gas in your lungs is physically compressed. Because it is compressed, the oxygen molecules become highly soluble.
They dissolve.
Yes. Normally, your red blood cells act like little cargo ships carrying oxygen. But under hyperbaric pressure, the oxygen dissolves directly into your blood plasma, your cerebrospinal fluid, your lymphatic fluid, all the liquids in your body. It completely bypasses the need for red blood cells.
That's incredible.
This hyperoxygenated fluid can then easily cross the blood-brain barrier and penetrate deeply into tissues, joints, and brain areas that have been starved of oxygen due to injury, swelling, or restricted blood flow.
So practically speaking, what does flooding the body with dissolved oxygen actually do for someone suffering from a traumatic brain injury or a chronic autoimmune illness?
The downstream physiological benefits are profound. First, oxygen under pressure acts as a massive systemic anti-inflammatory. It rapidly reduces swelling in the brain tissue.
Which is key for TBIs.
Right. Second, it promotes a biological process called angiogenesis, which is the sprouting and creation of brand new microscopic blood vessels, essentially rebuilding the supply lines to damaged areas. It promotes neurogenesis, the actual growth of new neurons, and as we discussed earlier with his underwater habitat, it causes the body to multiply the number of circulating CD34 plus progenitor stem cells by a factor of 8.
8 times the stem cells just from sitting in a pressurized tube. That is the body's elite repair crew multiplying and going to work. And it's not just for brain injuries. One of the most compelling stories to come out of Dr. Dituri's experience is an off-label success story. Dr. Dituri was at a local restaurant, and his server, a 21-year-old college student, recognized him and practically burst into tears. She had been suffering terribly from severe Crohn's disease.
Crohn's disease is an insidious inflammatory bowel disease. It causes severe painful inflammation of the digestive tract, which can lead to abdominal pain, severe diarrhea, fatigue, and malnutrition. It can completely debilitate a young person's life.
And it had debilitated hers. She was essentially chained to her bathroom. She was hooked on incredibly intense immunosuppressant medications, failing out of school, effectively having no quality of life. But Dr. Dituri looked at her condition and realized that because Crohn's is ultimately a disease driven by runaway, severe inflammation, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which is a potent systemic anti-inflammatory, might be able to disrupt the cycle.
He brought her into his clinic at the University of South Florida. After 38 specialized treatments in the hyperbaric chamber, her systemic inflammation plummeted. Her body finally had the oxygen and the biological signaling to heal the gut lining.
That is just wild.
She got her life back, she was able to get off the heavy biological drugs, she went back to school, and she even got certified as a scuba diver just to experience the pressure naturally. That is the astonishing power of this therapy when it is applied correctly by medical professionals.
And to really solidify how this pressure manipulates gases inside the body, Dr. Dituri uses this brilliant, intuitive analogy involving a common soda can. This specifically relates to decompression sickness, which is the terrifying condition also known as the bends that Navy divers face if they make a mistake.
It's the perfect way to visualize it. Think about a closed can of soda. The carbon dioxide gas is dissolved seamlessly into the liquid because it was sealed at the factory under high pressure. You can't see any bubbles. But what happens if you shake that can up and pop the aluminum tab really fast?
The pressure inside the can instantly drops to match the room, and the gas rapidly expands, creating thousands of explosive bubbles that shoot fizz everywhere.
That aggressive expansion is exactly what happens in a human diver's bloodstream if they are deep underwater and ascend to the surface too quickly. The nitrogen gas from the air they breathe dissolves into their blood under the deep water pressure.
Right.
If they come up too fast, the pressure drops rapidly, and that dissolved nitrogen instantly expands into thousands of tiny bubbles inside their veins and tissues. These bubbles act like physical roadblocks. They block tiny blood vessels, cause excruciating, agonizing joint pain, and if a bubble reaches the brain or heart, it will easily kill you.
So how does a hyperbaric chamber fix a diver with the bends? It acts by physically repressurizing the soda can. You rush the dying diver into the steel chamber, slam the door, and crank the pressure way back up. That artificial pressure physically squishes those dangerous nitrogen bubbles back down into a tiny, dissolved state, instantly restoring blood flow.
Exactly, you reverse the physics.
Then, while they are under pressure, you give the diver 100% pure oxygen to breathe, which creates a diffusion gradient that helps literally flush the nitrogen out of their system safely as you slowly, over hours, bring the pressure back down to normal. It is brilliant mechanical engineering directly applied to human biology.
It is brilliant, but it is also an incredibly precise, unforgiving science. And this brings us to a terrifying pivot in the narrative. Because while hyperbaric therapy is a literal miracle when performed correctly in a clinical setting, we are currently witnessing a highly dangerous trend emerging in the public sector.
We are seeing the Wild West of the wellness industry. I want to shift the tone right now, because if you take one single thing away from this deep dive, let it be this warning. We have wellness influencers, self-proclaimed biohackers, and everyday people buying cheap, soft-shell, zip-up hyperbaric chambers from overseas manufacturers.
Which is so dangerous.
And because they've listened to podcasts about stacking modalities like Dr. Dituri did, they are dragging other electronic devices inside these pressurized chambers with them to multitask.
It is a lethal, ignorant combination. We must discuss the horrifying reality of combining high-pressure, oxygen, and heat or electronics. Physics does not care about your wellness routine. The sources we reviewed detailed two specific catastrophic tragedies that occurred precisely because the operators completely disrespected the laws of physics.
The first one is a deeply tragic story about a young boy in Michigan.
Yes. This boy was inside a medical-grade, 100% pure oxygen hyperbaric chamber. It is vital to understand the environment here. This is not a chamber where you are breathing ambient air through a mask. The entire environment, the atmosphere surrounding your entire body, is filled with pure, highly reactive, highly combustible oxygen gas.
So it's essentially a giant match head waiting to be struck. So what happened?
The technicians operating the clinic made a series of fatal, negligent errors. They allowed the young boy to wear his own street clothes, specifically his pajamas, inside the chamber, and they failed to ensure the chamber was properly electrically grounded. As the boy was shifting around to get comfortable during the treatment, simply rubbing his pajama-clad knees together, the friction of the fabric created a tiny spark of static electricity.
A static spark. The kind you get walking across a carpet in socks.
Exactly. Normally, a static spark is harmless, but in a pressurized 100% oxygen environment, that tiny static spark acted as an immediate explosive ignition source. The pure oxygen fueled a catastrophic flash fire that engulfed the inside of the chamber instantly, and the boy was tragically killed.
That is just awful.
The operators of that clinic were subsequently charged with manslaughter. It tragically proves that you cannot bring anything into a pure oxygen chamber that you weren't born with. No synthetic fabrics, no hair dyes, no perfumes, no makeup, no outside clothing. Only specialized 100% cotton garments.
And the second tragedy we need to talk about happened at a physical therapy clinic in Arizona. Now, this one involves an air-based chamber, meaning it wasn't pumped full of 100% oxygen, but just compressed ambient air. But the physics involved are just as deadly. The owner of the facility, a physical therapist, was inside his own chamber, and it violently exploded, resulting in his death.
Dr. Dituri, being an expert in hyperbaric engineering, actually reviewed the official death investigation and engineering report for this specific incident. The findings are absolutely terrifying for anyone who thinks they can just casually bring their laptop, their cell phone, or their iPad into a chamber to watch Netflix while they heal.
Because what was the root cause of the explosion? Batteries.
Exactly. The investigation revealed there were 7 primary batteries inside that chamber with him in one form or another. Cell phones, tablets, whatever he brought in. Now, we need to think about how a modern lithium-ion battery is engineered. Manufacturers want maximum energy density, so they pack a tremendous amount of highly reactive chemical energy into a very tight, hermetically sealed metallic or plastic housing.
Right. They are packed as tightly as physically possible to make our phones thinner.
Now, take that tightly packed, sealed battery and put it inside a hyperbaric chamber. You turn the machine on and increase the atmospheric pressure dramatically. The external pressure physically squeezes the walls of the battery inward.
Yeah.
Then the hour-long treatment ends, you depressurize the chamber, and the battery expands back out. You squeeze it, you release it, you squeeze it, you release it. Over time, or even in a single session, if the battery has a microscopic manufacturing flaw, the immense pressure differential can physically crush and rupture the internal housing of the battery.
Which forces the incredibly thin separator inside the battery to tear, causing the anode and the cathode, the positive and negative chemical sides of the battery, to physically touch.
And when the anode and cathode touch, you get a dead short circuit. This causes an immediate violent thermal runaway. The liquid electrolyte inside boils and ignites, creating a massive chemical fire. And remember Boyle's law and Gay-Lussac's law, when you rapidly increase the temperature inside a sealed, rigid pressure vessel, you exponentially increase the pressure.
It turns into a bomb.
The chamber instantly becomes a bomb. You are trapped inside a small, tightly sealed, pressurized tube with a catastrophic chemical fire burning at thousands of degrees, and there is no quick way to open the door because the pressure is locking it shut.
It is an absolute nightmare scenario. So what is the absolute golden rule here for anyone listening who's considering this therapy? Never, ever bring a battery, a cell phone, an iPad, a smartwatch, and an unapproved red light panel or any unapproved electronic device into a hyperbaric chamber. Do not try to stack modalities inside the tube. Let the pressure do its job.
Furthermore, if you are actively seeking out this treatment for a brain injury or a chronic illness, you must rigorously vet the facility. You must look for the ASME PVHO stamp on the chamber itself.
What does that stand for?
That stands for the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, pressure vessels for human occupancy. If the chamber does not have that rigorous standardized engineering certification prominently displayed, do not get inside it. Hyperbaric therapy must be prescribed and monitored by a knowledgeable physician because oxygen administered under pressure is legally and medically classified as a drug.
It is a highly potent drug, it is powerful medicine, and it demands the utmost respect. But here's the incredibly good news as we pivot to the practical takeaways. You don't necessarily need access to a multi-million-dollar metal pressure tube or an underwater habitat to start taking control of your biology and applying Dr. Dituri's philosophy to your everyday life.
Right. Dr. Dituri is deeply passionate about accessibility. He wants everyone to be able to access the physiological state of healing. He developed a daily philosophy, a baseline protocol for the average person to optimize their biology, summarized by the acronym GAP. The actual letters he uses to spell it out are GAMTHS.
Let's break down this GAP acronym, because this is the stuff everyone can start implementing today. What does the G stand for?
The G stands for gym. Physical fitness is absolutely non-negotiable for brain health and longevity. Dr. Dituri notes that the mechanical stress of going to the gym, specifically lifting heavy weights and building lean muscle mass, actively triggers the release of specialized myokines.
Okay.
Specifically, it boosts interleukin-15, which acts as a powerful antiviral compound in the body, and interleukin-6, which, when released by muscle contraction, acts as a powerful systemic anti-inflammatory. By building muscle, you are literally giving your immune system the biochemical tools it needs to fight off disease.
So muscle isn't just for looking good. It's an endocrine organ actively protecting you. Then we move to A, which stands for autophagy.
Autophagy is essentially the body's internal recycling program. It's a cellular process where your body acts like Pac-Man, actively hunting down and consuming old, damaged, or misfolded proteins in senescent cells, which are essentially zombie cells that cause aging. It clears them out to make way for newer, healthier cells.
And how do you trigger that?
You trigger this profound cleaning process by doing hard things, fasting for extended periods, or getting into those freezing ice baths. You stress the body just enough to force it to kill off the weak, inefficient cells so the strong ones have the resources to thrive.
Next is M, for mental status. This is all about your psychological mindset. Dr. Dituri stresses the absolute biological importance of having faith, practicing deep meditation, or simply finding a life purpose that is substantially bigger than yourself. It cannot just be about you. Right. Having that broader psychological anchor, a reason to get out of bed and serve others, is a biological necessity for building resilience against stress.
Moving on, T is for telomere lengthening. Telomeres are the protective caps on the very ends of your chromosomes. Think of them like the little plastic tips on the ends of your shoelaces.
The aglets.
Exactly. Every time a cell divides, those telomeres get a little bit shorter. When they fray completely, your DNA gets damaged, leading to cellular aging, cancer, and disease. This is a concept known as the Hayflick limit. By actively managing psychological stress, exercising rigorously, and maintaining proper nutrition, you can actually stimulate an enzyme called telomerase, which protects and even lengthens those telomeres, directly extending your health span.
H is for hydration. And he's not just talking about sipping a glass of water when you suddenly feel thirsty. He advocates for proactively drinking nearly a gallon of proper mineralized water a day. He makes a really fascinating point about our daily energy levels. You know that classic 3 p.m. slump where you feel totally exhausted, your brain fogs up, and you desperately reach for a cup of coffee?
Oh, I know it well.
That is almost always a symptom of mild dehydration, not actual physiological exhaustion. Your brain tissue is literally shrinking and losing volume from a lack of water, causing the fatigue.
Finally, S is for sleep. He is emphatic that sleep is the ultimate, non-negotiable healing period for the brain. This is the period when the brain's glymphatic system opens up and literally flushes out the toxic metabolic waste, like amyloid beta plaques, that accumulate during waking hours.
It's like a pressure wash for the brain.
Exactly. It's also when the brain relearns, recategorizes information, and consolidates memories. Without 7 to 8 hours of high-quality, uninterrupted sleep, the brain simply cannot physically heal itself, no matter how many other hyperbaric or cold plunge therapies you try.
So that's the GAP protocol: gym, autophagy, mental status, telomeres, hydration, and sleep. But Dr. Dituri isn't just preaching this acronym on podcasts and selling books. He is actively applying these exact principles in incredibly high-stakes real-world environments. He is currently at the University of South Florida, running state-funded clinical trials to prove this works.
And he's treating some incredibly diverse high-trauma demographics side by side. He talks about running group therapy, where he puts a highly decorated military veteran who lost his entire platoon to an IED in Afghanistan right next to a Super Bowl ring-wearing MVP wide receiver.
Wow.
On paper, they have nothing in common. But biologically, both men have suffered massive, repetitive, concussive brain trauma. Both men are neurologically broken. And he puts them through his intensive 1-month outpatient protocol together.
And what happens at the end of the month? The wife of one of the men, who is actually a practicing medical doctor herself and was totally understandably skeptical of Dr. Dituri's wild methods, came back to the clinic 2 weeks later in tears and said, "What did you do to him? I have a completely different man at home."
That's
He
amazing.
gave them their husbands back.
Oh,
He gave them their lives back. And he's doing this by pushing for a revolutionary concept he calls creating an unfair fight for the U.S. military.
This is perhaps the most fascinating tactical concept we've discussed. He argues that we shouldn't be sending our soldiers into combat environments on a level physiological playing field. He wants them biologically optimized to survive a kinetic trauma before the bomb even goes off. This leads to the incredible paper bag hack they are currently researching in their blast mitigation studies.
This completely blew my mind when I read about it. Okay, let's really break down this paper bag hack. What exactly are they training these soldiers to do?
They are conducting studies on the physiological effects of having soldiers breathe directly into a simple brown paper lunch bag for a few minutes, right before entering a known firefight, breaching a room, or entering a potential blast zone.
Why on earth would you have an elite soldier hyperventilating into a paper bag like they're having a panic attack before a raid?
Because of the vascular chemistry. When you breathe into a sealed paper bag, you are continuously rebreathing your own exhaled air, which dramatically and rapidly increases the levels of carbon dioxide, or CO2, in your bloodstream. Now, normally we are taught to think of CO2 merely as a toxic waste gas that we need to exhale.
Right.
But in human physiology, CO2 is actually one of the most potent vasodilators in existence.
Meaning it forces your blood vessels to physically open up and widen.
Precisely. Thanks to a physiological mechanism known as the Bohr effect, the sudden surge in CO2 forces the blood vessels, particularly the delicate microvasculature in the brain, to open wide, massively increasing cerebral blood flow. By artificially spiking this blood flow right before an explosive blast wave hits them, the brain is pre-flooded with a massive buffer of oxygen and nutrient-rich blood.
Oh, wow.
This acts as a preemptive biological liquid shield against the concussive force of the blast. It preemptively protects the fragile brain tissue from shearing, mitigating the traumatic injury before it even occurs.
That is the absolute definition of an unfair fight, using advanced physiology to literally armor the brain from the inside out. It's brilliant, low-tech, and life-saving. And it all ties back to Dr. Dituri's ultimate philosophy regarding modern medicine, which is all about patient-centric care.
The current model of the modern medical system is entirely dysfunctionally fragmented. If you suffer a complex traumatic injury, you are sent to a neurologist in a hospital across town for 15 minutes. Then you are told to drive to a physical therapist in another city. Then you have to find a cognitive behavioral therapist somewhere else. You, the physically and emotionally broken patient, are forced to navigate this exhausting, bureaucratic labyrinth entirely alone.
Dr. Dituri's clinical model flips that paradigm completely on its head. He advocates for bringing all the specialized practitioners, the physical therapists, the neurologists, the cognitive experts, the hyperbaric technicians, the nutritionists, into one single room focused entirely on the patient at the center. The patient stays still, and the entire healing ecosystem revolves around them, communicating with each other in real time.
Like the potted plant.
Exactly. It's the potted plant receiving the water, the sun, and the fertilizer all at the exact same time from a coordinated team.
It is a radical, desperately needed return to holistic medicine, but it's backed by cutting-edge, rigorous biomedical engineering.
So what does this all mean for you listening today? We've gone on quite a journey. From the crushing dark depths of a 100-day underwater habitat where a man managed to reverse his biological epigenetic age by a decade, down to the absolute darkest depths of depression and a meticulously planned suicide following a brutal metal-crushing car crash, and finally emerging at the absolute vanguard of neurological brain healing.
Dr. Joseph Dituri's journey stands as profound proof that true, deep healing is rarely neat or linear. It is inherently holistic, it is incredibly messy, and it absolutely demands that you take active, relentless, educated ownership of your own biology. You cannot simply accept a tincture of time from a doctor when your fundamental quality of life and your very identity are on the line.
You have to step up and build the ecosystem you need to survive. And before we sign off today, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to really mull over.
We spent a lot of time today talking about how Dr. Dituri was forced to completely abandon the standard single-variable scientific method to save his own life. He adopted that potted plant approach, stacking a dozen different therapies from ice baths to oxygen to light simultaneously.
Right.
It really makes you wonder, how many other deeply debilitating, incurable chronic diseases out there right now? From complex autoimmune disorders like lupus or MS, to long COVID, to mysterious chronic fatigue syndromes are only considered incurable because our current rigid medical trial system strictly demands that we test only one single variable at a time.
That's a huge question.
What if the cure for our most persistent, devastating modern illnesses isn't a single patentable billion-dollar magic pharmaceutical bullet, but rather a perfectly timed, highly personalized symphony of a dozen different daily habits, environments, and therapies working in concert?
That is a question that challenges the entire structural foundation of modern allopathic medicine. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. Don't be afraid to question the tinctures of time you've been handed in your own life. Do the hard things, build your own unfair fight, and we'll catch you next time.